I want to talk a bit today about thinking in the TM Forum on something which we're calling business agility, and it's about reimagining OSS and BSS, and I want to go through some of the drivers for this, some of the initial conclusions we've made, and some of the specific concrete results. Now, there will be some presentations tomorrow that go into a bit more technical detail, so this is kind of giving you a kind of a 50,000 feet look at where we see the problems in the industry or the challenges, and some of the steps that we're taking to address them. So just moving on to the first slide. So really there's several challenges here that we're trying to deal with simultaneously. One is really about telco transformation, and this is being driven by market conditions, which is the market itself is evolving towards digital service provision away from connectivity services purely. There's some issues arising around what are the characteristics of next generation OSS and BSS, and this has caused some deep thinking about why some of the earlier models the industry's produced, like TMN, might not be quite so appropriate, partly because of market conditions and partly because of technology. Some issues about design principles, which I'll touch upon, and some about deployment principles, because business agility is about changing things quickly and on the fly, and that means that the long cycles of development need to be rethought, much more of a DevOps, continuous development and integration type model. So I'll touch on some of the work that we're doing in these areas. And the real focus here is about managing for change and agility. So automation is a part of this, but it's not the whole story. The real business drivers, and I think one of the earlier speakers said, was about delivering services quickly. And these are a couple of slides just to set the industry context and the market conditions, which I think come from an analyst report. I think it was Fact Sheet. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll see the growth in what is essentially companies operating in the connectivity market. And then you'll see in red, on the left-hand side, the growth of companies in the S&P, I think it was, 500 index. Top right-hand side, what you'll find is that the biggest companies are not sitting in the telecoms industry. They're sitting in industries that are running over the top. And if you look at the share and profit of the industry, bottom right-hand side, you'll see that essentially connectivity is being commoditized, and the growth opportunities are somewhere else. They're in terms of applications and services running over the top of connectivity services, which may not look particularly connectivity service based. So what this means is if you're sitting in a service provider, the nature of what you're trying to do as a business is changing, and therefore operation support systems and BSS are there to help you run your business. And if your business is changing, then you need to rethink what you're doing in the way in which you tackle the organisation of your OSS and BSS, or more generally, IT. So one of the early speakers mentioned about bringing services to market more quickly. We've captured the term concept cash. And the drivers are in two areas. One is around new technologies, and 5G is really important because it's starting to create the infrastructure for ecosystems of services in multiple industries. But there are other technology opportunities, particularly around cloud and AI. I think this has been mentioned earlier. But the new business opportunities are lying in areas which service providers haven't traditionally played in. And that means the role of service providers in those environments is changing. So what we've identified is the need to look at systems and processes that allow us to get from concept to cash. And this has a number of steps as the conceive, design, realize, and service viewpoints. But as the banner says at the top of the line, this is about doing all of this not in 18 months, but from a business point of view in like 18 weeks. 18 weeks. Actually, these are the wrong slides. It should be 18 weeks. However, to do that, you need a DevOps environment which has cycle times in the order of a day or so. So these are the real drivers: faster, cheaper, better customer experience, new revenues. And I would really strongly emphasize the last point here, because the kind of business that service providers are trying to enter is different from where they have been previously. So if you look on the left-hand side here, you'll see that the traditional value chain has been largely vendors, service integrators and consultants working into connectivity service providers that deliver basic connectivity services. But we're moving towards a new world of 5G-enabled ecosystems. And the slide on the right shows the kind of breakdown of the revenue opportunities, which are estimated to be in the area of 582 billion. I think those numbers come also from another analyst's report. So this is the magnitude of the change. So the problem or the challenge that the service providers got is not the same as automating the provision of connectivity services. It's about running their business, and the business that they're involved in is changing. So if you look on the left-hand side, the traditional IT stack has been around operations, people and processes, BSS, OSS and physical networks. But we're moving to more of a digital native IT environment where we've got cloud-native IT architecture. You can see early steps in the Etsy Mano area towards a cloud or a virtualized-based environment. There's virtualized infrastructure. And what we're seeing quite strongly is a huge interest in service providers in moving towards AI-enabled real-time operations. Now, there's a couple of points to note here. The zero touch has got multiple dimensions. And in fact, in a presentation tomorrow, I'll talk about something called zero friction. But the dimensions that you need to address are the interoperability between the components in the vertical direction delivering services, but also zero touch partnering with other parties, because many of the new business opportunities are around ecosystems and partnering, and we have activities and results in both areas. But to do this, the problem's got bigger. The volume and velocity of change is going up. So we've actually got to drive simplification and automation and the use of artificial intelligence, because the scale, volume and velocity of change is such that it's not possible for the traditional manually intensive processes to be used. We've identified five main challenges here. One is about the business and the IT agility, which I'll talk mostly about. There's the traditional requirement around optimization, which is actually quite important in the 5G context, because 5G gives us the opportunity to run what are both fixed and mobile services over a common infrastructure. And with multiple workloads being supported, it allows us to optimize in ways which we haven't been able to do previously. There's the issue of digital customer experience. So a lot of the reasons why people are moving to the over-the-top operators is because they find there's some convenience factor, and often it's being thought through from the customer's point of view, from a 360-degree point of view. There's also a growth in B2B and also growth in B2C. I just mentioned that B2B growth is quite important. You see traditional things like wholesale services between operators, but also some of the things that MEF has been talking about on carrier Ethernet. But also, we're starting to see services being composed out of players from quite similar industries and backgrounds in order to deliver end-to-end services to customers. Now, we've introduced, this covers a lot of topics, and we've put an overall concept in place called Open Digital Framework, of which the part in the middle we call Open Digital Architecture, because it's more of the traditional IT architectural concerns. And this is covering things like a business reference model and capability map. I think it was Daniel mentioned about services. We have quite an explicit large program looking at what the services are, including in the 5G area, and obviously we ought to corroborate that with other industry groups, which we are doing. We have an activity called Open Digital Architecture, which I'll talk about. We also have a very strong program on open APIs and reference implementations, which we've worked with quite a few groups, Etsy, and also with MEF. MEF effectively have an implementation of our APIs with their specific payload requirements. And we've got a number of programs looking at data analytics and AI, and that's a very strongly growing program. But like other organizations, we provide quite a lot of support and guidance and training and things like that, which I won't go into in any great detail today. We've developed an ODA framework, which is based on a life cycle model. And this life cycle model is explicitly related to the open group enterprise architecture called TOGAF. What we've identified is a need to have a vision, which is the item at the top here, of where we're trying to get to, which we've documented. And we've got work going on the left-hand side, marked D, which is a business architecture, which is around terminology, identifying the business requirements and the business services that service providers need to deliver. That's not only as part of an ecosystem, i.e. them as a partner to others, but also within their own internal operations. We've got specific activities looking at a functional architecture, which corresponds to the TOGAF information systems architecture, and we have some work on technical architecture, which includes a component definition model, which is an evolution of work which I think we started nearly a decade ago, and something called SDF and SES. It's called ODA components. It's quite similar to the kind of thing that Thomas was showing. But it has some extended capabilities to handle life cycle aspects. We've got solution implementation stuff, which includes component libraries, which we're developing, and also APIs. And there's also work going on in the area of deployment and runtime. This is around the ideas of like API gateways, proxies, that sort of stuff. All of this is being underpinned by the thinking of moving towards a model-driven agile approach with tooling. And the first parts you'll see that are in a tool which we call Curate FX, which is for capturing business models, and also the automation of the production of APIs is the other area that we've started. But the vision is, in order to get agility in a life cycle, to go from concept to cash, you've got to have a systematic, automated way of doing this. And it's similar in the manufacturing industry, away from just producing automation in a factory to computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing. So this is something about the computer-aided design of the business requirements, the factoring of those into the information systems architecture, into the technical architectures, then into the implementations, which, as Thomas mentioned, can involve multiple technologies, and into the runtime deployments. I'm going to focus mostly on this in the next slide. So we've developed a functional architecture which basically has identified a number of functional groupings. Now, we've deliberately not drawn lines between these groupings because this is all based on the idea that each of these functional groupings exposes services, and those services may be consumed anywhere. And that allows you to have a dynamic integration that's data-driven across the whole of this architecture. And the main areas that's shown here is around engagement management, which is about handling multi-channel 360-degree customer views in conjunction with the support of intelligence services. There's a whole set of functions around party management, supporting complex business models. So this is not just party in the sense of a customer, but it includes partners. There's a core commerce management piece, and this is quite important, that this supports third-party and marketplace offers. So it's not just about retail offers, it's about offers in a partnership environment. Now, a very strong principle that's emerging here is that the core commerce implementations, and we have an open source implementation, which I'll talk about in a minute, they want to build this so that it's not dependent on what or how the services are delivered. So it's requiring that the production area abstracts away all the details of how you deliver the service, and that's all the details of the technology as well. This is the one strong principle which has emerged. So a point of decoupling in this area is extremely important, and Joan Mayer, who's in the audience from Telstra, I know will be talking about this tomorrow in some more detail. The other issue is we're seeing volume and velocity of change requires us to move towards a more intelligence management-based approach. So many of you will know our previous work in frameworks, that's ETOM, SID, or more accurately known as Business Process Framework, Information Framework. What we're doing is we're building into the ODA functional architecture a series of IT functions or function groupings which are based on groupings of capabilities that are in the ETOM and the SID. And this is part of the move towards simplification. This is just an example. Party is quite important because there are quite a lot of privacy concerns, and we're looking at applying some prior work that we've done on privacy management to some of these areas. Okay. Now, some examples of, just go through a few examples of the things we've done so far. So, for example, in the area of ecosystem businesses, we've produced some documents on 5G monetization, which cover use cases and a whole load of other things. We've looked at the common ecosystem capabilities that all ecosystems for multiple industry verticals like IoT, smart cities, and those things have dealt with. We've looked at the business capabilities that CSPs need internally, and we've been working with smart cities and the IoT industry. In the core commerce area, we're building an open source implementation of core commerce, which will be shown at our flagship event in Nice this year, called BOSS. And in the decoupling and the integration, we have a number of TM Forum APIs which exhibit something called polymorphic behavior, which allows them to be tailored in a organized way according to the specific deployments and specific vendor requirements. There's a very massive piece of work on a network as a service API component suite, which I know Joanne's going to talk about tomorrow. And in the production area, we've been looking based on some catalysts at some user guides for network slicing and what the implications of those are for ODA production. We've also looked at model-driven design of management interfaces, and we've also done an extensive piece of work on intelligence management. Okay, and finally, in the procurement and onboarding area, because agility requires that to be automated as well, we've done a lot on commercial, operational, and technical onboarding. We've got a Tosca best practice approach, which actually the next version will actually support both physical and virtualized devices. And we've also got some work on joint agile development, which is really about DevOps type issues. And there's a lot of work on AI. So just to quickly run over this, we're building an open source implementation called BOSS, or Business Operating System. It's primarily focused on the core commerce management area, and we're starting to identify with the ODA functions what functions go in this area. We've also put together a specific componentization model, and we've also, shown in red, shown how our 54, I think, APIs fit across this landscape, and we're in the process of building this as we speak. Just a very brief word about collaborating with other organisations. We've worked with the Fireware Foundation, which is doing quite a lot of work in the area of IoT and smart cities. They've been adopting our APIs largely because of the polymorphic behaviour, I have to say. And we've been quite successful in working with those industry activities. Why is this important? It's important because if the marketplace opportunities for service providers are moving to industry verticals, we as an organisation need to be interacting with those groups. And this is just one example of several that we're working with, which are in these industry vertical activities. This is just largely from the Fireware Smart City IoT point of view, some of the examples of the organisations that we've been proactively working with. What you'll notice is not necessarily the traditional SDOs. That's because the industry and the business that service providers have is changing. So in summary, business agility is actually an industry imperative. And we are moving away from the traditional pipeline model of vendors working through to service providers, working through to retail customers, to much more complex ecosystems. And that's where the business opportunities for growth are. And this requires a new way of conceiving, realizing, and operating services. So it's not about automating the provisioning of networks alone and their assurance. It's actually about being a part of a broader ecosystem and moving towards a zero friction model for being able to work with other partners. Now, this has quite a few impacts. It means that OSS and BSS needs to be reimagined. 18 months to develop a new capability is just not okay. We've got to be thinking much more in terms of like 18 days to be able to do something, which has lots of implications on the way we do things technically. It also has implications on the kind of standards that we have. It has huge impacts on CSPs in terms of how they organise their people, the skills of those people, the standards that they're using need to be rethought through. And there's also a requirement for tools and best practices in this area. So this is much more than technology and automated operational processes to have zero fallout. It's basically about moving towards the digital transformation of CSPs, which has got very many subtle implications. And with that, I'll close the presentation and thank you for your attention. Thank you.